Welcome to the debate. Today's subject brings us to a really fascinating analysis of a highly specialized, deeply personal transformation notebook. In our source material, it's referred to as the Director's Code, or sometimes the Greg 3.1 Operating Manual.
Right. And for those who aren't familiar with this text, this is essentially a comprehensive, custom built system. It's designed to transform its author into a persona known as the director. And this figure is defined by an incredibly difficult balancing act, which is profound inner stillness coupled with formidable outer power.
Exactly. And the central question we are exploring today is whether a specific, highly esoteric philosophy actually belongs in this system. Does Vadim Zeland's metaphysical framework, Reality Transurfing, have a place in this notebook?
It's a compelling question because, well, the architecture of this notebook relies on a very rigid three-layer framework. Layer one is all about the inner world. So this is your spirituality, your mindset, your internal operating system. Layer two is the outer world, which is fiercely tactical. We're talking advanced influence, behavioral operations, the actual levers you pull to get things done in society. And finally, layer three is the story container, which provides the narrative structure that holds it all together.
Precisely. And my position today is that reality transurfing absolutely belongs in this manual. In fact, I'd argue it is the essential spiritual engine of Layer 1. Without it, the entire notebook collapses. It is the exact mechanism that prevents the user from descending into a state of reactive desperation when they are applying those heavy-duty tactics.
I'll argue that including reality transurfing creates a fatal, just an irreconcilable structural paradox within the notebook. Its core philosophy is all about surrender, and that fundamentally contradicts the hyper-tactical, highly engineered protocols mandated by the outer world layer. You simply cannot mix these two without massive cognitive dissonance.
To really get into this, I think we have to understand the foundational role reality transurfing plays in the text. The notebook's architecture explicitly acknowledges a problem it calls the known tension. The director has to use highly tactical tools in Layer 2. So books like Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power or Chase Hughes's Behavior Ops Manual. But the rule is, you must use these tools from a place of absolute competence, never from a place of desperation or neediness.
Which is easier said than done when those books are basically instruction manuals for psychological dominance.
Exactly. And that is where Zeland's concept of the dual mirror becomes the linchpin. For those less familiar with transurfing, Zeland argues that the physical universe reflects your inner state. If you approach the world with anxiety, force, or an intense need to dominate an outcome, you create what he calls excess potential. It's like an energetic imbalance. The mirror of reality then reflects that chaos right back at you in the form of destructive balancing forces. Basically, the universe knocking you down to restore harmony.
Right. The harder you grasp, the faster it slips through your fingers.
Exactly. Therefore, transurfing's teaching of inner stillness and what Zeland calls outer intention, which means allowing the world to reorganize around your clarity rather than physically forcing it, is a mandatory psychological safeguard here. It is the only mechanism that prevents the user from being entirely consumed by the Machiavellian tactics prescribed in the rest of the notebook. Without Zeland, the notebook is just a recipe for a power-hungry collapse. The profound insight here is that true power doesn't come from forcing people to do what you want. True power is having the tactical skills to influence someone, but possessing the internal stillness to walk away if it doesn't work out.
I hear the structural justification for it. On paper, having a spiritual safeguard sounds great. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The reality of putting this into practice presents a massive ideological mismatch. I think we need to look at what Zeland actually demands of his readers. His entire philosophy requires the practitioner to, in his exact words, let go your grip, to stop grabbing the world by the throat, and to completely eliminate the intention to get. You are supposed to reduce the importance of your goals to zero and adopt the detached posture of a participating spectator.
Which provides the perfect counterbalance to Layer 2.
But a counterbalance implies they can exist on the same scale. Look at the deeply controlling manual sitting right next to it in Layer 2. You have Chase Hughes's Behavior Ops, which details advanced interrogation tactics, the captor protocol, and behavioral profiling. You have Robert Greene teaching you how to meticulously calculate your image and maneuver around the egos of others. How can you ethically or practically use Jedi mind tricks on someone while simultaneously claiming you're just surrendering to the flow of the universe? It feels like spiritual bypassing. The notebook asks the user to completely relinquish control to the universe's flow, while simultaneously prescribing the exact linguistic and behavioral tripwires needed to force a target into compliance.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following your critique here. Are you saying that just by studying someone's psychological vulnerabilities and deploying a tactic, you've inherently violated Zealand's rule of surrender?
Yes, absolutely, because Zealand draws a very sharp distinction between inner intention and outer intention. Inner intention is the resolve to act directly on the physical world. It's forcing things. Outer intention is the resolve to simply have, letting the alternatives flow deliver the path to you. When you look at the behavior ops mental frame, you are instructed to systematically manipulate a target's expectations, beliefs, perception, and definition. You are observing behavioral tripwires and charting their vulnerabilities. That requires a tremendous amount of active, calculating energy directed at changing the physical environment. That is textbook inner intention. That is grabbing the world by the throat.
I think we're looking at the intention behind those tactics differently. You're assuming that the deployment of a tactic necessarily requires a desperate, grasping internal grip on the outcome. The notebook actually resolves this through what it calls the warrior-gardener principle. The tactical tools found in Layer 2 are weapons carried, not who the author fundamentally is.
But carrying a weapon still changes how you interact with the room.
It does, but let's look at the specific frame being taught. In Hughes's Behavior Ops, the most recommended frame to assume is the father frame. This is described as a posture of composure, maturity, and unshakable authority. It is amused, confident, and utterly non-reactive. Think of it like dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. If you start screaming back at the toddler, you've lost. You have matched their chaotic energy. You have to maintain that calm, amused father frame while actively physically maneuvering them out the door.
That's a great metaphor for a grocery store. But we're talking about high-stakes environments, boardrooms, sales calls, negotiations.
The principle scales up perfectly. The father frame aligns exactly with Zealand's instruction to be the detached observer. Zealand says you need to remain awake in the dream while everyone else is swept away by what he calls pendulums, which are basically these destructive thought structures or groupthink energies that feed on human anxiety. The director is taking custody of the room's dynamics, yes, but doing so without being emotionally entangled in them. You are turning the wheel of the car to avoid a pothole. It's deliberate, but it lacks that chaotic, needy energy. The tactics are merely the physical mechanics of navigating the reflection in the mirror, while your inner state remains completely detached.
Look, on paper that makes sense, but imagine actually trying to live that out on a Tuesday morning. This assumes a level of cognitive dissonance, but is incredibly difficult to sustain. Let's pivot slightly and look at how this plays out in the daily architecture of the notebook, because this is where the rubber meets the road. I come at it from a different way when we talk about the looper schedule.
The daily execution engine of the notebook.
Right. Now, Zealand is incredibly clear that placing high importance on a goal invites failure. The moment you decide you must achieve this, you create that excess potential, and the universe pushes back. Yet the looper prescribes exactly 6.5 hours of highly structured, high-leverage work every single day. We are talking about strict CRM follow-ups, booked call reminders, deep content creation, and an intense goal orientation drawn from the Danco blueprint.
Which the notebook frames as building a digital empire.
Exactly. And to do this, the notebook advises turning life into a video game. You have boss fights, you have daily levers, and quests to accumulate experience points. My contention is that the sheer volume of tracking, measuring, and optimizing inherently breeds the exact excess potential Zealand warns against. When your day is micromanaged down to the minute and you are grinding through a massive CRM database, you are vibrating with importance. You care deeply about the outcome. How does a schedule that intense not create a massive energetic imbalance?
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The rigid structure of the looper is actually the very mechanism that neutralizes that excess potential. It operates as what Zealand calls the fast of impeccability.
A fast of impeccability? Explain how grinding for 6 hours is a fast.
It's about where you place your focus. If you wake up every day staring at a massive, life-changing goal, the weight of that goal will crush you. You will obsess over whether you are going to make it. But look at the specific marching orders within the looper. The daily instructions are explicitly designed to lower that importance. It says, do not chase confirmation. It says, presence beats volume today. And, critically, focus on position over outcome. By transferring the practitioner's focus from the monumental weight of the final goal down to the immediate, manageable execution of the process, you strip away the anxiety.
But you are still intensely focused on achievement.
Yes, but through a completely different psychological lens. This is exactly why the Danko video game analogy is so brilliant here. Think about how you feel when you play a compelling video game. You are fully immersed in the flow state of the quest. You want to win, certainly. You're trying to beat the boss, but you aren't crippled by existential dread if your character has to restart a level. You play it with a sense of engaged detachment.
So you're saying treating it like a game tricks the brain into letting go of the stress?
Precisely. By turning the daily levers into a game, the director holds what Zealand calls the target slide, the vivid mental image of the goal already achieved, but completely stops gripping the steering wheel of the outcome. The strict CRM follow-ups and the CEO time blocks ensure that the physical action required in the material world is handled efficiently. The physical body does the work, allowing the metaphysical mind to remain relaxed, entertained, and trusting of outer intention.
I appreciate the elegance of the video game analogy, but a video game doesn't pay your mortgage. If you lose a client in real life, there are real-world consequences, which makes maintaining that engaged detachment a near superhuman feat. But let's look even deeper at the mechanics of human interaction here. Let's talk about the concept of frailing.
This is one of Zealand's most fascinating principles regarding how we interact with others.
It is, and I want to provide a quick translation for the listeners because it sounds complex. Zealand talks about frailing, which essentially means abandoning your own selfish goals in an interaction and tuning into the frequency of what the other person wants. His rule is, abandon the intention of receiving, replace it with the intention of giving, and you will receive the very thing you gave up. It's a beautiful philosophy of metaphysical purity and generosity. You give to get, but genuinely.
Correct. You align your frequency with theirs.
Right. Now place that profoundly generous concept next to Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, which this notebook leans on heavily for Layer 2. Greene advises things like getting others to dig their own graves, circumventing people's suspicions, playing the numbers game, and playing on appearances to deceive. Or look at Cialdini's principles of compliance. How do you square the metaphysical purity of giving with the strategic deployment of psychological triggers specifically engineered to bypass a person's critical thinking? It is a fundamental clash of mechanics. You can't be a selfless giver while covertly running a compliance script.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. I'd argue that you're interpreting Layer 2 purely as malicious manipulation and ignoring the overarching narrative container of the notebook. The Director's Code of Honor explicitly identifies a core value, which it calls stewardship, the ecosystem.
Which means what exactly in practice?
It means the director is mandated to protect client assets and relationships as if they were his own, and to lead with certainty. When you look at the concept of foiling, attuning yourself to the frequency of another person's thought energy and speaking the language of their interests, that isn't in conflict with behavioral science. It is actually the highest form of behavioral calibration, creating a mutually beneficial reality amalgamation, as the text calls it. Even Chase Hughes includes a strict note on ethics in his manual, stressing that these tools must be wielded with benevolent intent to leave people better than you found them.
But the mechanism itself relies on an imbalance of awareness. You are still engineering a dynamic where you hold the power, you know the script, and the target is entirely unaware of the invisible architecture guiding their decisions. It's paternalistic at best.
Only if you view all leadership and influence as inherently predatory. The notebook makes the case that most people are walking through life asleep in the dream. They are at the mercy of those destructive pendulums we talked about earlier. They are anxious, directionless, and deeply craving certainty. When the director steps into an interaction utilizing that calm father frame, projecting absolute composure, and taking custody of the dynamic, he is providing the exact safety and direction that the other person unconsciously desires.
So the argument is that you're manipulating them for their own good.
I wouldn't use the word manipulation. The director is absorbing their chaos. He uses the tools of influence to cut through the noise of the target's own limiting beliefs. Transurfing is what provides the philosophical grounding to ensure this immense behavioral power is used to harmonize the environment rather than exploit it. The intention is to give stability, and in return, via the law of Frailing, the director receives the compliance, the trust, and the business outcomes required.
It's a very robust defense, but I keep coming back to the cognitive burden this places on the individual. Think about what we are actually demanding of a person here. We are talking about a system where someone must constantly monitor their inner state to ensure absolute Zen-like detachment while simultaneously running high-level behavioral scripts, analyzing a client's conversational syntax for influence triggers, and navigating complex CRM business strategies. The notebook demands that the user be the author of the script, the director of the scene, and the lead actor all at once.
Which is why the notebook is a pursuit of mastery, not a weekend hobby.
But my contention is that reality transurfing requires a fundamental trust in the fabric of reality. It requires a deep-seated belief that if you just drop your importance, the alternatives flow will take care of you. The outer world layer of this notebook, the tactics, the behavior ops, the power laws, operates on the exact opposite premise. The premise of Layer 2 is to trust nothing, map everything, and control the frame, or you will become the victim of someone else's frame. To me, the inclusion of transurfing feels like an attempt to put a spiritual bandage over a system built on aggressive dominance. It really is mixing oil and water.
I don't see it as a bandage at all. I see it as the absolute bedrock. Let's summarize where this leaves us in the grand scheme of this notebook. Without reality transurfing, the outer world tools of influence, no matter how effective they are in a boardroom, inevitably become acts of desperation. If you only arm yourself with the 48 laws of power and advanced behavioral psychology, you end up trapped in a constant paranoid struggle against the world. You are forever reacting to threats, forever trying to manipulate every micro outcome.
And you're saying that leads to burnout.
Complete burnout. That path leads directly to the activation of those balanced forces that will destroy your progress. Transurfing is the necessary anchor. It provides the inner stillness required to truly embody the director. It allows the practitioner to utilize these incredibly sharp, heavy tools not out of fear, but out of a calm, grounded competence. They can use the tools knowing that the dual mirror will eventually reflect the image of success they hold in their mind without needing to choke the life out of every single interaction.
And I maintain that the director's code is attempting a beautiful but impossible marriage. You have a philosophy of profound metaphysical detachment on one side and a playbook of active, deeply calculated psychological control on the other. You cannot simultaneously surrender to the flow of the universe and actively plot to hijack the neurochemistry of the person sitting across the negotiation table from you. It requires a fracturing of the psyche. You are pretending to be a detached observer while actively playing the role of a tactical operator.
Though we clearly disagree on whether these layers can successfully integrate in a human mind, I think we can both acknowledge that the director's code is a staggering, highly ambitious synthesis of material. It highlights the profound human desire to master both the internal landscape of our own minds and the external mechanics of society. Agreed entirely. It is a remarkable document just in its sheer ambition. When you look at Layer 3, the story container, it actually draws heavily from Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. It frames this entire internal struggle as a mythological journey. Perhaps navigating this very tension, walking that razor's edge between total surrender to the universe and total mastery of one's environment, is the ultimate trial the author is attempting to overcome. The contradiction might be the point.
That's a brilliant way to frame it. The tension is the journey itself. The source material offers even more layers to unpack regarding identity transformation, the nature of the subconscious, and how we script our own realities. We leave it to the listener to explore further and decide for themselves if the integration of these deeply contrasting philosophies is a masterstroke of systemic design or an impossible contradiction.
Thank you for joining us.